anyone serious about handicapping is quantifying the situation. For example, large favorites do particularly well on Thursday nights because the short week for coaches to prep means that scheme plays less of a factor and talent typically wins out more. And
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Tanner Buzick on the show. He is the head of analytics at Dr. Bob's Sports. Among other things, we talk about how he handicaps the NFL from a quantitative perspective. He also is kind enough to share a Week 3 NFL bet. And along the way, he provides an in-depth analysis of teams like New England, Seattle, and Cleveland, among other teams. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every week, I send out 5 Nugget Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips, analytics, and humor. If you're looking for action on any given weekend, this is the free service for you. To sign up, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information based on data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Tanner Buzick. He is the head of analytics at Dr. Bob's Sports. Tanner, welcome to the show.
thanks for having me, Ed.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to chat. Tanner, I would love to know more about your story. How did you get into analytics and sports betting?
So I grew up in Kansas and got a math degree from Kansas. And my whole life, I thought I wanted to work in the ESPN research department from watching Stump the Swab on ESPN Classic as a kid. Then I got an internship there when I was in college, and I realized it wasn't for me. So after college, I took a job at a company that at the time was called Sport Vision. And some people may know they do the pitch effects tracking for baseball and the yellow first down line for football. But while I was there, I emailed Bob and I said I'd, do any project that he wanted for free. And he liked that first project. I did enough to bring me on part-time. And then about a year later, he brought me on full-time. So I'm now in my 7th season working alongside Bob, originating our NFL. And then 3 years ago, I built our college basketball model, and that's a real team effort just with the amount of games there is in college basketball. So Bob, Jay, and myself all chip in there with certain parts of the handicapping process.
Awesome. So much I want to unpack there. So you got an internship at ESPN, and then what were you doing and what did you not like there?
Well, so I got an internship working in the stats department at ESPN when I was in college. And I kind of realized that, they're basically just looking up stats for maybe the anchors on SportsCenter or some other talent, ESPN talent to say. And I realized that, you might be doing whatever it is, 4 hours of work for someone on air to say 3 of the stats you made. And I would rather, my time be spent more efficiently. And obviously at the time already, when I was an intern there, I had a huge interest in sports betting, but ESPN, now they have the whole ESPN bet thing going. But at the time, ESPN wasn't crazy about gambling. They had a little bit going on in the research department, but it wasn't a major thing. So I just decided that I kind of wanted to trend more towards the sports betting side because that was more interesting to me.
Awesome. I feel like a lot of young people that want to break into sports want to work for a team, kind of go that route and do those types of things. What was it about betting that kind of attracted you?
Well, I think, first of all, I just think it's a lot of fun. There's nothing like sitting there on an NFL Sunday watching the games when you have, as much stake as we do in the outcomes. But yeah, I think the people that want to work for the teams kind of experience the same thing that I found when I was at ESPN, which is just that, you're working a full-time job, putting in a ton of effort, and then maybe the GM or whoever you're presenting to only takes into account, one or two things you say, and it can get frustrating at times that you're not getting through to people, or your work, a lot of your work isn't going used. And so it was better for me in the end to, take a job with Bob. And then now all of my time, I feel like, is being used valuably.
Absolutely. I feel like a lot of teams make an analytics department because they have to, because analytics is kind of like the new thing that they have to do. And they're like, okay, well, let's throw so-and-so money and put these three people in a cave, and maybe we'll listen to them. Maybe they won't. Right. So, and maybe that was the same way in the broadcast at the beginning too, right? Like when you were at ESPN.
Yeah. That's kind of what I found. And when I was there at the tail end, I went to the ESPN analytics department. So I think for the last couple of weeks of my internship there, I helped them with their SPI projections for Euro 2014.
Nice.
But yeah, I just realized that I wanted to do something else. And honestly, living in Bristol, Connecticut for the fall that I was there, it also made me realize that, in my 20s, I didn't want to spend my whole time in my 20s in rural Connecticut either.
Right, for sure. So Tanner, maybe give us you talked a little bit about what you do for Dr. Bob Sports, working with Bob Stoll, working on NFL and college basketball, but maybe tell us a little bit more details. Like, you're probably, tell us more details about exactly what you do.
Yeah. So, for the NFL, and that's basically what Bob brought me on to do. I do. Bob has been doing part of that handicapping process since I came on in 2017, but most of it on the NFL side is me. And so I go through a number of different ways to analyze every game on the NFL slate each week. And it starts with the model that we built in 2017, which has updates before every season. I'm not going to say much more about that. But then after the model that I built, you layer in situational analysis. And I think this can sometimes get a bad rap, as sometimes people conflate situational analysis with those worthless trends you see online. But I think anyone serious about handicapping is quantifying the situation. For example, large favorites do particularly well on Thursday nights because the short week for coaches to prep means that scheme plays less of a factor and talent typically wins out more. And if you don't have this situation comfortably quantified, how would you have known whether there's value on the Giants or 49ers this week? So that's part of the handicapping process. And then we move on to injuries. So I have a value on every player in the NFL in terms of how much they're worth in win probability. Then I'm quantifying the weather in each game to put a number on the scoring conditions. And then finally, you've got matchup analysis. So, for example, I wrote last week on drbobsports.com in the free analysis section about how the Buccaneers passing offense was particularly well suited to beat Chicago's defense. I mean, the Bears' strength is those linebackers. They had those two big deals this offseason, the TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds. But Baker's best weapons are definitely not his running backs and tight ends. And the Bears have basically no depth at cornerback behind Jalen Johnson. So one of Mike Evans or Chris Godwin was going to be across from second-round rookie Tyreek Stevenson on most dropbacks. And I mean, the Bears defense is obviously bad in general, but I think you could see how they'd be relatively better suited to face a team like the Falcons, who like targeting running backs and tight ends. So I give a matchup rating for each game, and I have all of those quantified as well. And that's also a part of the handicapping process.
Excellent. So when you're looking at any NFL game, right? So you have your model, it's going to spit out a prediction for you. You have kind of the situational analysis. Like, I guess, how do you combine those, and is there a weight that you put on each one of those, or is that just kind of like game by game that you go and you figure that out?
No, I mean, we Bob and I like to think we have them relatively quantified, like to a decent, precise level. What I mean is that Bob has been putting a situational analysis rating on every game in the NFL going back decades. So he knows exactly when he says, whatever it is, the Vikings are 3 a +3 in situational analysis, we know exactly how much we should add or subtract in terms of win probability from what our just raw math model spits out, just because we have that going back so many years, and the sample size there, we feel pretty solid in what we've quantified each of Bob's situational analysis rating. And to the same extent for the matchup analysis, like I was talking about, I have less of a sample size on those, just going back to whenever I started at Dr. Bob Sports, so that's been just over 6 seasons now, but it's still a decent sample size enough to say, like, okay, I think that the, whatever it was, the Buccaneers last week were a +3 matchup rating, and I know how much win probability to add to our raw math model for the matchup rating as well. So we try and quantify everything just so that we can figure out, exactly what our estimated edge on each game. But it's I guess to your question, it's subjective in the initial part, in that, we're just saying, like Bob is just saying, okay, in my experience, this is a +3 situational rating, and I'm saying, like, this is a +2 or +3 matchup rating, and we're just trying to stay consistent with those, obviously, because we want to have the number that we're quantifying it stay the same throughout the years.
So +3, you meaning this matchup is worth 3 points to the spread?
No,
or in terms of win probability?
Yeah, it would be nice if we had it just in percentage points, but it's more just like it's a +3 is worth a little bit more than 3 percentage points in cover rate. We just found that historically in terms of matchup ratings, and then Bob actually does his on a 5-point scale. He's been doing that, like I said, going back decades. So they're on different scales, but we run an evaluation of our model each year, and so we know how to convert those scales into cover probability, basically.
Right. When you first started, or maybe give us a sense, since you've been starting with Bob. Bob is obviously a legend that's been doing this for a long time. I guess. How much were you working more closely together at the beginning as he was teaching you more things, and now 7 years in, you're a little bit more independent, you're handicapping? Do you guys still talk every week about NFL, even though he's, I think, mostly focused on the college football side of things? Like, how does that relationship work?
Yeah, I mean, Bob and I still go back and forth every week about the NFL on most games. We're in pretty much constant communication. I would say when I first started, it was more about trying to put this whole process that I laid out earlier into place. So Bob and I would go back and forth more often about how we were going to handicap each game and the process we were going to do to get there. And now we just feel so comfortable with what we're doing that we're just talking about, minute details of each game each week. And then we decide on what we're going to do. I'll send Bob, like, okay, this practice report just came in on Thursday. I think the market's probably going to move in the next half hour if we don't hit it. So then, I'll have Bob set up a release time and we'll go from there. But I would say even to this day, Bob and I are still in constant communication every week about the NFL, even though he's mostly focused on college football.
Tanner, is there a week 3 NFL bet that you would be willing to share?
Yeah, so I like Carolina +6 this week, and we saw some money come in against the Panthers when Bryce Young's ankle injury was announced yesterday. We're recording this on Thursday morning, but I think it's safe to say that Andy Dalton isn't a downgrade. I mean, Dalton averaged more yards per pass play last season than Geno Smith, so I'm kind of surprised we saw money come against the Panthers when that injury was announced, but basically, the reason that I like this bet is Carolina's offense has faced 2 aggressive man defenses to start the season, as Atlanta's defensive coordinator Ryan Nielsen worked under New Orleans head coach Dennis Allen last year. So kind of similar defenses they faced in week 1 and week 2. And the Panthers' mediocre wide receiving group just could not separate for Bryce Young against this aggressive man coverage. And Young is one of 2 quarterbacks in the NFL with less than 40% of his throws into open windows. Now, Seattle's defense ranks just 25th in man coverage rate. And I think Carolina's coaching staff should be able to scheme more open receivers this week. The Panthers are averaging 39% more yards per route run against zone than man this year. So I kind of like the Panthers offense to bounce back on Sunday, whether it's Dalton or Bryce Young. And then on the other side of the ball, I mean, CJ Gardner-Johnson is probably the best player in the two secondaries that Geno Smith has faced thus far, which is just a crazy easy start to the season. And now Panthers' new defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero, his defense ranks 10th in EPA per dropback. And last year, Evero graded as our best defensive play caller in the NFL. And just look at the Broncos defense now. I mean, they rank 30th in EPA per play this season after ranking 9th in EPA per play last season when Evero was calling the defensive plays. And they basically have the same personnel on that side of the ball. So you can see the gap between Vance Joseph and Evero in terms of defensive play calling. And I think some people are worried about Carolina's loss of linebacker Shaq Thompson, but I really just don't think that's going to be a major issue due to all that depth that the Panthers have in the back seven. I mean, Evero can just use Troy Hill and nickelback, and then 6'3", 220-pound safety Jeremy Chin to mix in with Gruger Hill alongside Frankie Louvu in the box. I mean, Chin's already got 42% of his snaps in the box this season, so I think he can, slot in nicely along with Gruger Hill to replace Thompson. And then Seattle is pretty banged up. I mean, the Seahawks had 9 starters miss practice on Wednesday, and that's not including tackle Abe Lucas, who's already on the IR. So our model makes the Seahawks just 3.5 points favorite. And so I definitely like the Panthers +6 here.
Excellent. Tanner, you talked a little bit about kind of the aggressive man defenses that Bryce Young has faced versus like a zone defense. Like, do you actually have a number on that? Like, have you gone back and kind of looked play by play at, how quarterbacks do against man and zone, or is that more of a subjective adjustment that makes you like this game?
Well, this whole thing is definitely what I was talking about in that sense is what I'm quantifying what I talked about in the matchup ratings. So I would say that the Panthers match up better against a zone defense than a man defense, but we have quantified it as well. Like I said, the Panthers are averaging 39% more yards per route run against zone than man this season. So we already know, we've seen it when the Falcons and Saints did not run man, when they gave the Panthers zone looks, the Panthers passing offense was better in the first 2 weeks of the year. And now the Seahawks probably aren't going to give the Panthers a ton of man looks. So I mean, we quantify it in terms of how well he's done against both types of coverages this season. And that goes into my matchup rating. And then, like I said, that layers on top of the just initial math model for us.
Excellent. I really appreciate that you talked about this game on this podcast, simply because I do feel like this number is going to be available later in the week. Even if it's announced that Andy Dalton plays, I think the market's kind of going to go back and forth, but probably not get off this 6. Just because I do think you're right that, like, right now in September 2023, there's probably, I don't know, 0 difference between those two quarterbacks, or maybe even an upgrade because Dalton's a veteran and Bryce Young is still a rookie that is struggling. I think that's fair to say. So I guess another question that I had for you, with Bryce Young, he has struggled, and, I don't mind that he's kind of struggled in the passing game. I think you kind of expect that, but to see him, he's a small guy, and to see him get tackled from behind and fumble the ball is something that concerns me. Any hesitations about that, or do you just kind of trust the rest of your analysis?
Well, I'd say, for Bryce Young from a passing perspective, has graded as our best of the 3 rookies that are starting from a passing perspective. Anthony Richardson is obviously adding a ton with his legs, but I'd say that the biggest worry about Bryce Young, just his size, is that he's not going to be able to hold up for the entire seasons in the NFL, just taking all of those hits. I don't necessarily worry about him from a running standpoint, because Bryce isn't trying to run a whole lot. But that's what from a handicapping perspective, if you got Andy Dalton as the backup and Bryce Young goes out in any of these games, like you said, it actually might be an upgrade. So I'm not super worried about Bryce Young running around, his ability there, just because they have such a solid backup. It's kind of like what we see. We don't know if Anthony Richardson is going to start for the Colts this week, but they also have a really solid backup with Gardner Minshew. So there's not a whole lot you have to factor in there in your handicapping process, just considering how good these 2 rookies backup quarterbacks are. It's probably 2 best backup quarterbacks in the NFL there.
Absolutely. Also wanted to ask you about Seattle and whether, kind of what you thought about them coming into the season. I thought they were a big time regression candidate simply because I think Geno Smith had a really good year last year, and a lot of that might be unsustainable. I thought they were a little overrated heading into the season. They obviously came out and played poorly week 1 and then won a game last week in Detroit that maybe they shouldn't have won, had a little bit of turnover luck in that department. Is there some sense, maybe give us a sense for what you think about Seattle kind of heading into the season and how they've done compared to those expectations?
Well, heading into the season, I was a little bit worried about Seattle's defense because I think that Sean Desai, who's now the Eagles defensive coordinator, might have played a large role in how well the Seahawks did, relatively well. I mean, I think they still ranked 26 in EPA per play last season in defense, but I think he did play a large role. So losing him in the offseason, I think was going to hurt them on the defensive side of the ball. And I kind of liked the Seahawks offense heading into the year, but the reason they've been, so poor. I mean, Geno Smith is averaging just 5.8 yards per pass play in the first 2 weeks. And he's, like I said, I mean, the secondaries he's faced are so poor. And I think it's just because the losing both starting tackles has made a big difference. I mean, not having Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, those two started as rookies last year, and the expected jump those two starting tackles were going to make in their second season was a big reason why I think so many people were optimistic about Seattle's offense heading into the year. But now neither of those guys is on the field. So, I mean, I think that Geno is going to probably be, facing a ton of collapsing pockets on Sunday. I mean, you got Brian Burns and Justin Houston bearing down on third down. So I would think I would feel differently about Seattle's offense if they had both starting tackles. And I was already kind of down on Seattle's defense just with the loss of that assistant Sean Desai.
Okay, so not particularly high there. Excellent. Tanner, Nick Chubb is out for Cleveland, and I'm interested in general about how you guys kind of account for rushing. A lot of models, including my own, really put the emphasis on the passing game because that is the more important component in the NFL. But how do you account for Nick Chubb's absence, and what does that mean for you in this Tennessee at Cleveland game?
Well, I mean, There are some people that think running backs don't matter. That's actually, it's a great website. If you've ever been to rbsdm.com, that is a great website. But I think it's more like most running backs don't matter because I do think that Nick Chubb does make a difference for Cleveland's offense. I mean, he led the NFL in rushing yards over expected from 2018 to 2022, according to the model from Tage Seth. And you can follow him on Twitter to see that graph that he tweeted out earlier this week. And so we're adjusting a half point to Cleveland's offense for Chubb, but Chubb is one of the few guys in the NFL that we would be adjusting at the running back position. For example, we're not adjusting at all for the Giants without Saquon Barkley. But I also think, there's guys that it makes a difference. I think it's safe to say that the Niners trade for Christian McCaffrey last year was part of the reason they went on that run down the stretch with Brock Purdy. So it's on a case-by-case basis. There's maybe 5 guys that really matter at the running back position. And then everyone else is a net neutral. And even if they are better than their backup, the reason that you would not adjust the offense is because, now the Giants don't feel like they have to feed Saquon Barkley. Maybe they pass it more, and we know that passing is more efficient than rushing. So it makes up for it there. So usually their net losses, and I think we saw, in analytics forward front office, like the Vikings have no problem dropping Dalvin Cook this offseason because they knew that, it would just allow them to pass more, and the offense really wouldn't miss a beat without him.
Yeah, for sure. I presume how often a running back catches passes in the passing game definitely matters in that as well, right?
Yeah, it does. And like I said, that's probably why we were why McCaffrey would be up there with Chubb in terms of maybe worth a half point as well, which would be at the high end of how much a running back is worth. Now, Chubb, it's kind of a different story because he's not super involved in the passing game, but we still think he's worth a half point just because of how good he is in terms of rushing yards over expected compared to a replacement level running back. And so we think that Chubb is worth a half point, regardless of that he's only catching 1 or 2 balls a game.
Interesting. Does your model like any side in this Tennessee versus Cleveland with everything considered?
Well, I don't think I like either side, but I do think that the total is a little bit short. And the reason is the loss of Chubb is actually not going to be felt as much in this matchup as it normally would, because you already want to throw on Tennessee's defense. I mean, they rank 25th in EPA per dropback allowed and 4th in EPA per rush. So I think Stefanski is a smart enough coach to know that he was already going to have a passing game plan coming into this week. So Nick Chubb was already going to take a step back on Sunday. And I just think the total is a little bit too short here. I mean, Tennessee's best pass rusher, Jeffrey Simmons, is going to be bottled up by the Browns' Pro Bowl guards, Joe Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. And I think that the reason we've seen this total come down from the opener of 41 is that Cleveland's defense has a 41% pressure rate, ranking 5th in the NFL. And that Titans offensive line is just so rough. But I think Ryan Tannehill is going to attempt to slow down the Browns' pass rush with play action like he did last week, completing 7 of 9 passes for 168 yards. And the other thing, is that the Browns will likely be without starting nickelback Greg Newsome, and the Titans have had particular success targeting wide receivers lined up on the inside. I mean, both DeAndre Hopkins and Nick Westbrook-Akine are averaging more than 2 yards per route run in the slot. I mean, the weather looks all right, certainly by Cleveland standards, and I think we should see this total on the other side of 40. The Browns are going to pass more in general, take advantage of the Titans' poor pass defense. They should be able to block the Titans' best pass rusher. And I think that this total should be 40.5 rather than the 39.5 where it is at the time of this recording.
Excellent. Tanner, how about a surprise prediction for the 2023 NFL season?
I think my surprise prediction is that the Patriots are going to rally back and make the playoffs. I think you can get that at plus 325 or better. So the Patriots are actually plus 3 in net success rate after facing 2 of the best teams in the NFL in the first 2 weeks. And Bill Belichick has adapted that defense even better than I thought he would after losing center field safety Devin McCourty this offseason. It's really one of the most fun defenses to watch in the NFL. And Bill O'Brien ranks top 10 in my offensive play calling metrics so far. So it looks like the Patriots should be favored in 3 of their next 4 games. And I think this price should be more like plus 250 and even after the Patriots 0-2 start.
Excellent. Yeah. So if I remember right, you guys were on Patriots week 1 against Philadelphia.
That was a tough loss.
yes, for sure. It does seem like things have kind of gone wrong for the Patriots. I mean, I think a lot of doubters out there are like, oh, you got this 3rd-year quarterback in Mac Jones, and you're not really giving them any weapons on offense. Where's the production going to come from there? What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Mac certainly doesn't have great weapons, but like I said, I think that they can make up for some of that with scheme. And O'Brien is he's been better. I kind of had him as a league average play caller coming into the season, but from what I've seen from him so far, and I'm not going to disclose the particular metrics that I'm looking at there, but from what I've seen from him so far, he has been a pretty solid play caller. And I mean, they faced the Eagles defense, obviously pretty high caliber there, and a Vic Fangio defense in the first 2 weeks. And they've looked pretty good so far, at least from the underlying metric. I mean, you strip out all the variance things, like turnovers and third downs. And like I said, I mean, they're plus 3 in net success rate against the Dolphins and Eagles. That's right. Pretty solid. And I know both of those games are at home, but I mean, the Patriots are clearly an above average team in my eyes. And if that's the case, then they have a shot. I mean, it's not the most likely thing, right? I said it should be priced at plus 250, but they have a shot to come back here and turn the season around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be. I mean, the division's tough, right? With Buffalo at the top and Miami, obviously a solid team, but if you can get to 9-8, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like
the Jets are clearly worse now, right? So the division got easier right. From where it was when it started the season. The Patriots play the Jets this week, so we'll know even more after this week's game. But yeah, I mean, it's an 0-2 start. It's a relative long shot here, but that would be my surprising prediction for the rest of the way here.
Awesome, appreciate that, Tanner. Well, one last question. So, a young person that has successfully broken into the sports betting world, what advice would you have for other people that are looking to follow the same path as you?
Well, I would say the major thing you're going to have to do is get really comfortable with coding, whether that be in R or Python. You're definitely going to need it if you're going to do any sort of top-down approach. But even if you're doing originating like myself, coding is probably going to play a major factor. I know not all people that are originating are coding their own models. Some people I think are doing it just based off of situational and matchup stuff like we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. But I think, at least from my standpoint, as the market gets more and more efficient each year, if you don't have a model underneath your handicapping process that you feel comfortable with, that you've coded yourself and you know exactly how it works, you're going to struggle as the years go on. So I would say the number one thing you're going to have to do, and whether that's, take a boot camp course, whether your college teaches some statistical coding classes, or you just have to, teach yourself online. Getting comfortable with coding is going to be the major thing. And the cool thing we've seen recently, I don't know how much you've played around with the new Chat GPT, but you can ask it simple coding questions and it will give you the exact output that you just need to copy and paste into R. And it's super easy. I mean, I remember when I first started, I just had to spend hours going through, Stack Overflow pages, reading about people that had the same problem I did and fixing it. But now you can basically just ask ChatGPT to do it for you. So coding is getting easier, and I think everyone should be learning how to do it.
For sure. So you kind of did it the old school way, like you didn't have a class in college or anything like that?
Well, I took one of my statistics classes in college did focus on just doing statistical analysis in R. And that was really helpful for me because it basically showed me how powerful the language was. And then, after that semester that I took that class at KU, I really dove in and started my own, building my own betting models, because that's what I wanted to do in my free time. And so I've just kind of progressed it from there.
Yeah, I was an engineering major in undergrad and had to learn a lot of the coding myself. Like there was a coding class that I took in undergrad, but I think it was Fortran. It was so awful that I don't really remember it. It was like one of those things that you just kind of do and make sure that you have that credit on your transcript and then move on. And then, when I got to grad school, that I took a course in C, and that was great and taught me a lot of like basics of programming and data structures and stuff like that. That's useful. But then I think, no one codes in C anymore. Well, that's not particularly true, but everyone's doing like R and Python. And so then when the world shifts to Python, and I highly recommend shifting to Python because I really like it. I think it's very useful and a really nice language to program in. I find myself, going back to the O'Reilly books, right?
There you go.
And, teaching myself how to do that. And, yeah, so it's not exactly easy. I'm sure it's easier now. I mean, God, I think it was like a decade ago that I first started digging into Python when I went off kind of on my own doing this. But yeah, it's got to be easier now, right? With YouTube, online tutorials. I think it's good to ask ChatGPT to do all these things, although you should probably have a pretty solid, you should know the fundamentals behind what you're doing,
definitely.
Right? So you can definitely. Because I'm sure that you can trick the AI. But yeah, so that's definitely your advice for breaking into the world.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much the curriculum in college, like if you're a statistics major in college now, I mean, I would hope that they're teaching even more coding than either of us got in college. But right. I don't know. So you might have to still do it on your own mostly, but hopefully, college kids these days are getting even more exposed to coding already.
You're younger than I am, but when I was in college, there was a lot of theory being learned, and not that I'm against that. I think there's a lot of use for understanding the underlying principles of everything that we do, right? But the idea that you need to work things out by pencil and paper gratuitously to a nauseating extent is just completely unnecessary these days, right? Like we need to adopt the use of the computer and use it as a tool. That doesn't mean you throw out your understanding, but And especially as
Yeah,
I
I
kind of
feel
watch
like
my kids like go through school and math, I'm like, we need to not teach people to be computers. We need to, teach them to make computers and, do interesting things with them. Right. So, I don't know what
yeah,
it
I
was like
feel
when
like
you were in college,
well,
but
I gotta, in college, I feel like I wasted a ton of time just sitting there with pencil and paper doing proofs of,
right.
calculus or something along those lines, because you
Mhm.
had to take all these certain math courses to graduate with a statistics degree. And it's just like, I really wish I didn't have to do all of that. I wish I would have got more,
Yeah.
time with a professor that was teaching me how to do statistical analysis on the computer, like you were saying. So I don't know what it's like for math majors currently, but hopefully they're not spending as much time with the pencil and paper doing proofs as maybe we were.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with learning proofs and getting exposure to that. I don't think there's anything wrong with getting exposure to pencil and paper stuff because maybe that's, maybe Tanner, that's what you wanted to do in life, right? You ended up being like a
Right.
math professor or something like that. But I just think there's too much of that, at least what I remember from school. And hopefully that will change. Tanner,
Yep,
I'd like
I
to
agree.
end this. Yep, awesome. Tanner, would love to end the show with some potentially non-sports questions. What's your favorite book?
I really like Tim Urban's book, What's Our Problem? But I think his old blog post might be even better. I think everyone should read How to Pick a Career and How to Pick a Life Partner on Wait But Why, his blog. And Taming the Mammoth is a really awesome article on there as well.
Tim Urban is definitely awesome. What's the problem? Is that the most recent one he published?
Yes. Yeah. It just came out. Mm-hmm.
And this is the one that kind of looks at society's problems in general.
Right. Yeah. Tim does just such a good job of looking at complicated things, complicated ideas, and just distilling them in ways that make everything seem so simple. Whether it be with his illustrations or just his writing in general. So I think when you're thinking about a complicated decision, like how to pick a life partner or a career, or he goes really far with this book in the problem with our society. It's fun to see him try to distill that into just simple solutions.
I appreciate the reminder about that. I get his emails, and I remember getting the email that said, "Hey, this book is almost ready." And then I don't remember ever getting an email that says the book is ready. That's probably on me. But what I think is interesting about Tim Urban is that, in this age of decreasing attention and, I do think in general, our attentions are decreasing. And I've certainly made my content shorter and more consumable for people here at the Power Rank. But he went the opposite, right? Like it was one of these things where if it wasn't 5,000, 10,000 words on a blog post, like he wouldn't even publish it. Right. And I'm not necessarily saying that's the way to go, but there certainly is an audience for it. Right. In the sense that, there's a lot of people that read him and know him and obviously getting tweeted by Elon Musk back in the day when it was still Twitter obviously helped him get known. Right. But like just the idea, and I guess I think of like the essays that Bob has on the site, Money Management, those aren't short either. But still things that he keeps on his site because, there's our people out there that want to like know things in depth. And that long form is really useful.
Right. And I think we're seeing that kind of with podcasts. People maybe have a shorter attention to reading and maybe that Tim gets around that with all of his illustrations that makes it a little bit more fun to read. But we're seeing, a ton of podcasts do really well in a long form. Right. Style. So I think people are interested in really diving deep into particular topics, even if they're not going to read whatever it is, the 10,000 words that maybe Tim Urban was posting in 2014. And so maybe he, gets around that with the illustrations, but I don't know. I think people are still interested in long form content, however you're giving it out.
Yeah, it certainly has to be good, right? Like that's, it has to be good to start. Otherwise no one's going to care, but it's still, I don't know. I'm kind of old school and I still read books, but doesn't mean everyone else is. But I do think in general, there's still an audience. Tanner, how about your best culinary experience?
Best culinary experience. I think this one might have actually just been last month. A buddy and I got a chance to try A12 Wagyu in Tokyo, and the steakhouse we were at only wins one of those at auction every couple of years. So they keep the supply really low on that. And so we were just really lucky with our timing there. And, they cook it in front of you. And I already like all of those Japanese flavors in general. And we also did a 6-hour food tour in Tokyo while we were there. So that was awesome as well. So I just think that whole trip in general, I love Japanese food. And if I had to pick one culinary experience, it would be the night that we got the A12.
Awesome. How did they prepare it and what did it taste like?
They cook it right there in front of you, which was awesome. You go to those hibachi grills here in the U.S. and you wonder if they actually do that in Japan, because it's a bit of a show here.
Sure.
When you go to those, there wasn't a show. They weren't throwing shrimp at you at this nice steakhouse that we were at in Tokyo, but they actually did bring the meat out and cook it right there in front of us. And the different thing that they do in Japan is they cut everything into bites for you. So they kind of create, and this is, similar with sushi too. They're trying to create the perfect bite for you in Japan rather than you cutting your own steak. And so they cut the meat for us. They'd have us put a little garlic chip on top of the meat. Sometimes they told us to do it without a chip, with a chip. And then there was a little sauce that they had made, and you're supposed to do it without the sauce and then with the sauce. So it was amazing. I mean, I love Japanese food in general, and that particular experience, it was just me and a friend who was out there for work, and we had basically our own chef cooking right in front of us. So it was incredible.
Do they ask you how you want your steak cooked, or do they just make it rare?
I think they did, but yeah, they basically had a recommendation, which was a Japanese word that I think meant rare, medium rare, and that was basically how they cooked it. They didn't give us much of a choice. I think if we prodded, we could have got it something else, but we wanted it the way they wanted to cook it, anyways. As
a true foodie would, I presume this wasn't an inexpensive experience, and if it's not. If it is the kind of experience that I'm thinking about, there's no way you go against what the chef wants to do, right?
Oh, I agree. And yes, it was not inexpensive, but it seemed like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, I could go back to Tokyo plenty of times the rest of my life, and I would not get a chance to be at a steakhouse when they have one of the A12 in stock. So we had to go for it when we were there.
And I presume the beef was just silky smooth.
Oh yeah,
like, texture-wise.
It was an actual melt in your mouth situation. It was really everything that you would have expected it to be.
Awesome. I actually try to eat less beef just for the environment, but I certainly make exceptions, and that sounds absolutely amazing. On your 6-hour food tour, what was the highlight there?
Well, we got to try a bunch of different snacks that I would have not necessarily had. One of the cool things we had was this kind of, it was like a wasabi kelp, which I don't know if that sounds good or bad right off the bat, but it was delicious. It was kind of served in a tub like you would see hummus served. So you had to kind of eat it with a toothpick. You'd stick a toothpick into the kelp and eat that. And then we just did a bunch of food stalls. So underneath Tokyo Station, the train station, there's a ton of just different food stalls. And we went around to each one. We had this incredible curry udon. We had some chicken karaage. It was just a bunch of amazing things. So it was incredible. We definitely went in super hungry and came out super full, but there was
nice.
Some walking in between each destination to try and give us a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
But it was a blast.
Very cool. So you really ate the kelp with like a toothpick? Like that was like the right dose?
Yeah. It was. He basically just gave us a tub of kelp, my friend and I, and then 2 toothpicks, and we would just kind of. And the kelp, was cut up into maybe 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter squares, sort of.
Okay. So you're kind of poking it.
Right, you're poking it.
Got it. So you're getting okay. I was imagining like eating hummus with a toothpick.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. All right, Tanner, if you could have dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
I think for this one, I'm going to say Sam Harris. I think he's trying something really interesting with the moral landscape, and I'd like to prod him on a few areas where I disagree. So I think that would be a really fun and interesting conversation to have if I could have dinner with Sam Harris.
Awesome. So he is the kind of pop philosopher guy that has written a bunch of books, right? Is that right?
Yeah. He's written a bunch of books, and he's got a pretty popular podcast that he brings on interesting guests to talk about society's issues. And I don't always agree with Sam, but I definitely think that he's trying something interesting, which basically he's trying to lay out a moral value system based in science instead of maybe some of the antiquated ways to lay out moral systems.
I mean, that seems wrong at first glance to me. Right. I mean, as a scientific person, that's kind of not where I get my morals in any stretch. Right. Is that kind of your objection to it, or would I need to know more about what he's actually saying?
I'd encourage you to read his book, The Moral Landscape. But my major objection to him is I don't think he's I don't think he's considering why religious morals have had such high fitness from like a Darwinian perspective throughout the millenniums. And I think if he wants to unseat that system of morals, he is going to have to do more work on this. Although I worry about the religious morals fitness just because of how it's running into so many issues with modern day science, disproving, whatever, some of the stuff in the Bible or anything along those lines.
Right. I mean, I honestly don't. I'm not really much of a religious person, but I also don't think it's really going anywhere. As you said, it's had high Darwinian fitness for millennia, and I think there's a good reason for it. So, on that note, Tanner Buzick, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, so you can find me at the Dr. Bob Sports YouTube page. We do a podcast there once a week. And so if you're interested in any of the NFL analysis that I do, you can see it on that podcast. I also write up every game on the NFL slate each week at drbobsports.com. And then so you can go there for more information. I'm not on Twitter or X because I kind of think that the gambling community can be negative at times, and I don't want that kind of negativity in my life. So you can just find me on YouTube. But other than that, thanks for having me on, Ed.
Yeah, absolutely. Wait, so if someone wants to harass you about your work, Tanner, they have to, what do they have to do? Like put a comment in the Dr. Bob podcast YouTube page? Is that how?
Yep. If you want to harass me, you can do it there, but I intentionally don't read those comments. Grant, my co-host, reads all the comments for me in case someone asks an actual good question that we should answer on the podcast, but I don't even read the YouTube comments. I'm trying to keep myself away from all that and just focus on picking NFL winners for the time being.
That sounds good. Tanner, thanks again.
My name is Ed Fang, and I'm honored to be your host for the Football Analytics Show. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really enjoyed having Tanner on the podcast for the first time, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I thought he was very generous with the bets that he gave out. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter at the Power Rank. It is where you can get 5 Nuggets Saturday, my curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Once again, my name is Ed Fang, and I'll talk to you again next week.